KoshienCast, the weekly sports anime fan podcast. My name is Matt, and joining me today is a very special guest, Matt.
Hi!
Hey, so this is our series review for Tiger Mask. I kind of never really believed that we'd get here. It's been a quick 9 months of watching wrestling anime every week, which has been occasionally delightful, but often disappointing. But we'll get into the specifics as we go through. One thing I want to point out up front, whenever we do these series reviews, we have a general format where we'll go through, we'll talk about the season, we'll talk about major themes, we'll discuss whether it executed it well or not, and we're going to do that to some extent today. But we're going to try a new aspect to these reviews and see what happens. We're going to draft our favorite and least favorite characters. So I listen to an almost unhealthy number of baseball podcasts, and that's where I got the idea. On some of the ones I like, when they want to discuss something, they'll do a draft. So the two hosts will go back and forth, and they will draft ideas or players or whatever that they want to discuss, and they'll format things that way. So essentially how it'll work, one of us will go first. We will claim a character for our quote-unquote team, and then we will have a discussion about that character, why we think they're the best or the worst character in the show, and then the other person will be able to go and draft, and they'll be able to draft any other character in the show except for the one that I already discussed. So just like a draft in a sports league, except there are no consequences, and we're talking about cartoons. So it should be pretty self-evident how it works as we get into it. But before we do that, I want to just talk about the show itself. We didn't really have any history with the show or with the franchise of Tiger Mask before we started.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was kind of excited because it did seem like it was going to be kind of like this sort of fun, campy throwback.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like the first 8 minutes did that. But, yeah, that was kind of what I had hoped for going into the show.
Yeah, you were pretty hype about this series.
Yeah, no, because I was just envisioning some sort of, like, a modern-day take on, like, a goofy 70s cartoon using that sort of logic.
And and hopefully being super self-aware.
Right. But that's not really what we got.
Yeah, exactly. And I was basically with you. I was into it. I wanted it to be goofy. I wanted it to be self-aware. I wanted it to be funny. It ended up being taking itself much more seriously, but not really having the execution to do so. So basically how this series went is it followed the exploits of Naoto and Takuma, who are both trying to avenge their master, who was injured by the evil wrestler Yellow Devil. And so Naoto and Takuma go on quests. Naoto becomes the next generation of Tiger Mask, a legendary hero, and Takuma joins the evil organization and becomes Tiger the Dark. They try to work from the inside and the outside to find Yellow Devil and avenge their master. And along the way, they make a lot of friends and fight a lot of fights. And eventually, at the end of the show, they find the original Yellow Devil and they beat him up.
I mean, I don't think that there is a pure summation of what the story really is.
Yeah.
They meet a guy, or they want to fight a guy, they can't do it, very end of the story, they do it.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
So yeah, I think one of the biggest issues with this show is that it never really seems to be quite sure what it wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many times where it, like, one of the most remarkable things I noticed about this show is that our opinion wildly fluctuated in how it was doing different things well and then just completely, like, failing in other aspects. I think the most notable of this was, I think, like, for example, the Red Death Mask fight was probably the one that was, for the longest time, was kind of the best episode, just because of how well animated it was, how unique the fight was, with a guy whose specialty is literally just crushing faces.
Yeah.
But it's like we were really excited about that for one episode, and then there was another later episode where we were really getting excited about the implications of Fujiwara Mask's backstory.
Yep.
But it could never really stick to one thing that it was good with, and then just immediately would disappoint the next episode.
Well, yeah, it would disappoint, and also it would drastically change in its tone.
Right.
Because one episode you'd have these super high stakes matches where it's sort of life or death, and then the next one you'd have this completely irrelevant plot with like goofy Looney Tunes hijinks.
Right.
And so it was very unclear what the show was trying to do. The only consistent thing we could determine was that it was trying to promote New Japan Pro Wrestling in real life.
Right, because they had actually funded the show. They were the ones who were actually, like, paying for the development of the show. Yeah. And what it really comes off as, I think a lot of times, is that it's kind of masquerading as a revival of an old cartoon, an old beloved cartoon show, because this is actually a reboot of the Tiger Mask franchise that was very popular in the 70s.
It's a sequel, not a reboot, but yeah.
Well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's technically a story sequel, but I mean, but they're trying to reboot it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Essentially, they told the same story.
Right, effectively. And so, but they were trying. That's what they were trying to propose the series as. That's what they were trying to kind of throw out to people. But really, what this was, especially with all the interaction that they had with like real wrestlers. Like, for example, like Makabe, Naito, you'd see all these different, like, actual wrestlers.
Okada and Tanahashi. Yeah. I mean, these are some of the most famous wrestlers in Japan.
Yeah,
the Bullet Club, those are real guys. They're really well known. Yeah.
Right, within wrestling circles, and that's kind of what it came off as, and I think really the story was, and, like, the tone was really, really hurt by this. Because they would have to constantly come up with excuses for, like, why certain characters, like, could lose, like, the only way that they could lose. I think the most notable example of this I can think of, I think it was Tanahashi going up against who they thought was the Yellow Devil. This was, like, in like, the first third of the series.
Yeah.
And he's literally about to be ripped in half, just about. And, he's constantly saying, like, no, I will not give up. And then his corner man, who, one of the few unique characters who was part of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Ryu, throws in the towel for him. And, they couldn't have had it so this character, would just, make the pragmatic choice and be like, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
But instead, it's like, no, we have to show how this character is, like, a real man, because he's a real person.
Right. They could have Ryu quit, though, because Ryu is fictional.
Right, exactly. It shows, like, okay, so Ryu can quit for him because he's a fictional character, and so, that way it doesn't actually, like, ruin this actual wrestler's reputation.
Yeah.
And, there would be choices like this all throughout the series that are clearly done just so they don't hurt their actual actors' images. And I think that really is what hurts a lot of the story.
Yeah, it totally hamstrung it.
Right. And I think the best episodes are the ones where we don't actually have New Japan Pro Wrestling, or really anybody who is really involved with it.
Yeah.
I think the best example of this would be the final episode, which has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's exclusively either made-up characters or, allusions to real people, but, nobody whose image they have to maintain.
Right. Yeah, exactly, because it's all about Haruna and Miss X and kind of their endeavors to start up their own wrestling league. And, weirdly enough, it's also the only one that has, that really seems to capture what we were really hoping for from the show. It's slightly self-aware, but still has enough... But, it still is able to sort of tell a serious story, but, they have some, little gags, some sort of self-awareness of how goofy wrestling is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's the only episode. This is episode 38. It's the only episode that captures simultaneously the fact that professional wrestlers know that what they're doing is a little bit silly,
Right.
but they also take it very seriously. Like they could never. The show was never able to strike that balance. It could only strike the we're deadly serious bit. It could never acknowledge, okay, like the costumes, like the whole setup, it's a little silly. It's about promotion and it's about showmanship as much as it's about actual, fighting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's really the only episode that, like, really was that striking. I mean, you would occasionally have some, like the only other episodes that were really fun were the episodes where we had, like, some neat fights.
Yeah.
Like, where they got the budget to actually, like, animate some of the fights. So you had, like, Red Death Mask, that episode, we kind of already touched on that briefly. That one was really fun just to sort of watch the animation. Admittedly, I think the fight against Tiger the Great III also worked, not just because of the animation, but it was finally kind of striking that hyper-masculine, over-the-top, goofy sincerity I was kind of hoping for a little bit.
Yeah.
Something kind of like Gurren Lagann, where it's so stupid, but it buys into its own hype so much that you can't help but go along with it.
I agree.
And
we're gonna wrap up our review at the end. We're gonna give you guys a list of if you want to watch this show but you don't want to suffer through everything we did. We'll give you like a few episodes to watch to actually have an enjoyable time with it.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we're gonna do a draft.
Okay, so yeah, I think the way we're doing this is that you're going first.
Yeah, so basically the concept of this is, imagine we're in a fantastical world where we need to assemble a wrestling team, and I'm going to assemble a wrestling team, and you're going to assemble a wrestling team. The only stipulation is that 3 of them have to be the best possible wrestlers in terms of quality of character, and 2 of them have to be the worst, and so we're going to see whose team is better. But also the concept doesn't matter. We're just going to do a draft.
We were really just trying to find an excuse to talk about the characters.
Yeah, exactly. So based on the fact that you told me I go first with the first overall pick of the first round, I select the only choice, the People's Champ, Fukuwara Mask. So Fukuwara Mask had an interesting trajectory in this show, mostly because he started off as a gag character exclusively, who we didn't really like that much.
Not really, no.
Because it seemed like all he was there for was stupid jokes and like total tone shift wackiness. I mean, his meaningful introduction came on the heels of Red Death Mask, and we were still hoping that the show was going to be serious and exciting, and so we saw Fukuwara Mask initially as a step away from that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he was the first and what we find out later on, though, is that, he's this weird, goofy comic relief character who was getting really on our nerves. But then there is this little bit of information that suddenly changes the entire view you have of the character, which is when he reveals that he knows Tiger the Great III, who is being built up to be the main villain of the series, and that he seems to have some history with them.
Yeah, and that comes surprisingly late in the show. One of the reasons we were fascinated with him early was that we saw him take off his mask.
Right.
And that little scene completely captivated us because we decided there had to be a reason we saw his face. And so we kept... what was fun for us, like, the way that Tiger Mask was fun was trying to figure out how this story might secretly be good. Because on the surface, it was really never good.
Right.
Until the very last episode, which could be a standalone. But for the episodes 1 through 37, the story was never really good in itself. So we kept trying throughout to decide ways that it was going to totally subvert our expectations and become a great story, and we would theorize at length, and every theory revolved around some great revelation of why we saw Fukuwara Mask's face, what his relationship is to GWM,
Right.
and how he is the fundamental player and the main actor in this story. And that didn't exactly pan out, but it was endlessly delightful to theorize about.
Right. It was about the most fun we had with the series, was trying to theorize and figure out what the heck Fukuwara Mask's point was in the series.
Yeah, because he was really the only mystery.
Right. Unfortunately, the series did kind of take the most boring approach to the resolution of his character.
Yeah.
But it was still delightful to do.
It was a fun ride.
Yes.
All right, Matt.
Yes?
Who's on your team? Who's your first overall pick?
Okay, so my first choice might surprise you, because I don't think I ever actually talked about this in the in our weekly episodes. I am actually going with The Miracles.
Okay.
Okay, so there are a couple reasons why I like The Miracles. First of all, I kind of like how the show takes this approach with the miracles, because there are 4 different miracles that are introduced. Miracles 1 through 4. And there's always kind of this sort of pervading mystery, this reveal to who the miracles are. It's not really like an obvious thing that they're doing, but I appreciate the story, like there's kind of this satisfying mystery reveal to them. So it's like you find out the first one you find out about is Miracle 2, which is Kevin, who has been a major player throughout the show, kind of on the in the background.
Yeah.
You get the revelation that one of them, I believe it's Miracle 3, who's the main trainer for GWM, who's been constantly forced into the cycle. And then the fourth one was he was the gymnastics tiger, correct? Or he was like the gymnastics master that we found out about, I think.
Universal Mask?
Yeah, Universal Mask, that's the one.
Yeah.
And I do think that there was this we never find out about the first one, which kind of makes me think that they didn't even realize that they were setting up this formula there. Because I kept imagining that there was going to be this big reveal to who Miracle 1 was.
Yeah, exactly. And he was going to be Fukuwara Mask. No, I'm just kidding.
I wish, but no. But, I thought that was, at least for the time, I thought that was at least an interesting hook that the series was developing. The other thing I like about The Miracles is that I like how succinctly they sort of describe the issue with GWM. So the major conflict in the show is basically, the hometown hero versus globalization.
Right.
So, you have kind of Japan that was kind of effectively destroyed by GWM. They lost all their talented wrestlers. They're kind of going around destroying them. The Miracles are effectively they are mass-produced wrestlers. They have this sort of weird stylistic choice, but it's very safe, and it sort of removes somebody's identity.
Yeah, they're all uniform, and anyone could step into it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like anybody could do this. Anybody could step into it. Anybody could be a miracle. But it's such a, it's like their design is at least flashy, but it's not done. But it's not really flashy in a unique way.
Yeah, there's no personality to it.
Yeah, exactly. They're sleek.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of uniform. They have a uniform color scheme. And, I thought that aspect to them was actually kind of interesting. It showed a lot more insight to the character design, or a lot more thought about the character design than I think any other design did in the show.
Yeah, that's a good pick. Even though you get 4 people on your team, but that's okay. I'm going to let it slide.
I consider them one person because, frankly, who their identities are is not really that interesting.
Yeah, and so that's fine. I'm not offended. I want to make one more note because we forgot to mention it on Fukuwara Mask real quick.
Oh, by all means.
Is that a lot of the reason that we were fascinated by him was that we were convinced and speculated to no end about the fact that Fukuwara Mask was going to actually be Yellow Devil, and he was going to be this great story of redemption. So that's what we talked about a lot. We didn't mention that, and so then when that fell through, we tried to come up with other even more out of
absurd theories.
So anyway, So with the first pick of the second round of the Tiger Mask draft, I'm going to pick a man who could himself defeat all 4 of the miracles, the incomparable Red Death Mask.
I'm gonna cross him off my list.
Yeah. So what I love about Red Death Mask is that even though he loses at 2 separate points, he never really feels like he's lost the intimidation factor. You know,
right.
He is this massive person whose personality is completely self-centered and sadistic.
Right.
Who his special move is grabbing people by the face and crushing them, and then jumping up and slamming them by the head down onto the mat. So he's this basically uncontrollable force. You know, there's a reason that he's sort of dressed up like the devil. He's supposed to be almost this demonic personality. And in the Hell in the Hole arc, he's just treated as this absolute force of nature. He betrays everyone who trusts him. And he's never really given any redemption or humanity. He's just treated as this monolith of evil and strength. And to me, that's what makes a good Tiger Mask villain. It's not someone who's relatable or understandable. It's someone who's absurd. And he was absurd in all the most fun and extreme ways.
You know what? You're not wrong. I think it's also... I think I give Red Death Mask a little bit more credit because his fight was really the first really fun match.
Yep.
For the longest time when we were covering this, we were constantly longing back for the days of Red Death Mask. Yeah. He was kind of the first villain outside of Yellow Devil that they actually established ahead of time as well. Like, the series was kind of building to him a little bit.
Yep.
I think he's also is he the only one who's actually killed somebody in the show? Because I'm pretty sure he killed somebody during the Hell in the Hole.
Yeah, he might have been the only one. Yeah, that was yeah. I shouldn't laugh, but that was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and was he also the one who selected a table as his weapon of mass destruction?
Well, it's not that he selected it; it's that the drone dropped it, and then he just spent the rest of that arc carrying around a table.
Which is pretty great.
Everyone was freaking out, like he's got a chair and a table. You know? Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, no, Red Death Mask is great. I absolutely agree with that pick. For my next pick, I am going to go with Tiger the Great III.
Okay. Wow, he was not on my list.
Oh, okay, good.
Go ahead.
So I'm glad. So the reason I have picked Tiger the Great III, again, kind of like Red Death Mask, I think he's one of the only villains that they really establish properly. I think they actually do a pretty good job of establishing his strength. It's kind of a running theme in Shonen series. In order to kind of establish how good a character is, you kind of need to give them some sort of big hype moment. Or maybe not even a hype moment, but you kind of have to have them go up against somebody else that you already know is a threat. I think they actually did that pretty effectively with Tiger the Great III, with how he was able to go up pretty easily against Mr. Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Because just the prior episode, we had seen how much Tiger Mask had struggled against him. And it's and then you see how he deals with Mr. Bigfoot. You see how his strength is still, maybe a concern to him, but he still is able to pretty handily deal with him.
Yeah.
Throughout the series, he does always kind of come off as this big, imposing figure because of how much people are not able to deal with him. I do think the reason why he was not my number one pick is because they do sort of undermine that a little bit with the fact that Takumu probably could have beat him when he was in his match, but just sort of decided not to.
Yeah, because he wanted to make him suffer.
Yeah. And, we've gone on and on about how much better they could have played that off. It would have been fine if he had been defeated at that point. Uh-huh. But I think overall, he is kind of somebody I was kind of rooting to see defeated. Just because, again, he never really quite loses his imposingness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, again, kind of important for a Tiger Mask villain.
Oh, that's a good pick. He was a good villain. He filled the role, and I mean, I think what I would have liked from him is a little more understanding of his backstory. It's to me, you either have to go to one extreme or the other, right? So one extreme is no backstory, no explanation, just absurd evil, like Red Death Mask. The other way you can go and still have it be successful is have him be evil, but have some understanding of why. So, like, but what they did that bothered me with Tiger the Great the Third is that you just got a little bit. You got a little bit of understanding of where he came from, what his motivations were, but you didn't get enough to really piece it together in any meaningful way. So he wasn't absurd. He wasn't fun based on his absurdity. He was just sort of poorly explained.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
All right, so with the final pick for not the final pick, the first pick of the third round, my final choice for best character, I'm going to go with Spring Tiger / Haruna.
Okay, let me get her off my list.
And this was a tough pick for the last one. The first two were pretty obvious for me. This one was a little tricky, but ultimately, like I've mentioned already, the tiebreaker was episode 38, which was an exceptional episode of any anime, and extremely exceptional for Tiger Mask. But it sort of put into context the rest of the series that Haruna really stands out as an interesting character, mostly in relation to the main characters, because what's interesting about Haruna is that she learns things and she has motivations that grow and develop with time, and she has frustrations and she has goals that she's not comfortable talking about with people, and she has hidden feelings, and there's a little bit more to her, whereas the ostensible main character Naoto has one feeling. It is he wants to be good at wrestling so he can have revenge now. And you realize that's pretty much it from him. He doesn't have any development. He doesn't really become any more interesting by the final episode than he was in the first episode. And so Haruna really stands out as the only main character who has a pattern, or who really has a trajectory in her character arc.
Right. I would also say she has more of a personality.
Yes.
Than Naoto does as well. She has a multifaceted, she's a little money hungry, but you can kind of also see where that comes from because, she lives in a very small sort of rundown shop with her uncle. Yeah. You kind of see where that comes from. But, she's not, overly greedy. She still does she does seem to sincerely care about her family unit. Her sort of, she wants what's best for Naoto. She just wants a little money off on the side. It's not, nothing wrong with that.
I also like her as Spring Tiger because she isn't very good. That's the thing, is that Naoto, it takes forever for Tiger Mask to lose a single match. That's the thing, is that Naoto, he doesn't even have a history as a professional wrestler. He just goes off, he trains by himself for years, and then he jumps in and is immediately an undefeatable wrestling champ.
Right.
And so there's really, you never really have any fear that there's anything at risk with him. But Spring Tiger, she's not that good at first. She's sort of pulling it together.
Right, yeah, no, I mean, there's more room for growth for her. There's more room to kind of see where, for her to go.
Yeah.
There's a much more interesting journey for us to follow with Haruna.
Yeah. So, and needless to say, her fight in episode 38 is just about the best in the show.
Oh, yeah, even better than Red Death Mask, I would say.
Yeah, and so, again, as long as whoever was involved with episode 38 stays on staff, I would be delighted to see a Haruna-focused sequel.
Yep. The only issue I would have... There's only a couple of issues I have with Haruna's character. One is that I don't like the revelation that she had as a crush on Naoto all this time.
Yeah, it was so shoehorned in at the end.
It's they have never once shown any interest in one another. It has always been a brother-sister thing for them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I think the only issue with that final episode is that she does beat, kind of the mainstay of women's wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, admittedly, she did kind of just let her win.
Yeah.
But, there is kind of this, where does she go from here?
What's she gonna do now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, I mean, Tiger Mask certainly the main show dragged it out because Red Death Mask was the best fighter that they had, that GWM had for a long time. So, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they can figure out something to do.
Yep.
Okay, so my final pick for the best of the characters, actually along the same lines as you, I'm going to go with Haruna's longtime rival, Miss X.
Oh, interesting.
In a show that should have had a lot more personality, but didn't, Miss X kind of stands out to me a little bit as being one of the very few characters with almost an abundance of personality. She's very, she's imposing. She manages to be kind of like this sexy female, like she manages to kind of pull off being both kind of sexy, but also sort of intimidatingly so.
Yeah.
Like, everything about her just strikes me as fierce. She gains some points for me, though, in that final episode where, she does kind of show off that she wasn't really, like, loyal or devoted to GWM. She was just sort of a PR rep that they had hired on, and she was just kind of going along with it.
Yeah.
Once she kind of sees how messed up GWM is, or how much they're kind of, like, just suddenly deciding that they don't value her opinion more, I mean, she pretty much leaves her right away and tries to develop her own brand, I think that's an interesting angle for her.
Yeah, I agree.
And I kind of like the fact that she can show some sensitivity there, the fact that, she's willing to kind of reach out to Haruna a little bit more, And, that's kind of another thing that kind of went understated during the show, was that Miss X and Haruna always kind of had this back and forth going on. Mm-hmm. Because they were always kind of trying to negotiate with one another, and I kind of like the fact that the end episode kind of throws them together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says like, hey, that relationship, for what it was, it had some impact,
Yeah, exactly.
Because we're so used to in this show all the relationships having no impact and no meaning.
Right, and now it's like suddenly that this is a relationship that is changing now.
Yeah.
And I kind of appreciate what Miss X brings to that.
Yeah, I agree. Those are good picks. I do have to say it's kind of funny. None of the picks for your side were on my list at all. Interesting.
Yeah, no, and amusingly, I think all of your picks were on mine. Outside of Fukuwara Mask, who I did not put on my list because I knew you were going first, and I knew he was going to be your number one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was torn at the end between picking Haruna or Viper Boston, but I realized the only thing I like about Viper Boston is her awesome name.
Right. That's fair.
Matt, we're gonna switch sides here. Do you want to take the first pick for the worst character in Tiger Mask?
They are technically two separate characters. Would it be wrong if I combined them together because I hate them for the same reason?
Just whatever. You're gonna do what you're gonna do.
Okay. It is a tie between El Saboten and Gorilla Jeet Singh.
Oh man, those were two of mine. But yeah, okay.
They're two of mine too. Okay.
All right, go. Just go. Yeah, you knew I was gonna talk about them.
Oh yeah, no. So. The reason I hate them so much is because they're literally the exact same reason. They are stupid stereotypes that are just not funny, that are clearly thrown in for cheap gags, because like, oh, look how different they are being foreigners.
Yeah.
There is really not anything more to their characters. If I had to say who was worse, I would say El Saboten, because we get an entire episode devoted to him, in him speaking like even like dumber than a toddler would.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh my god, just what are you doing? What are you saying?
Yeah, what are you trying to accomplish with either of these characters?
And it's like, I don't know. I really can't help but feel like El Saboten. Like, I don't know what Japanese stereotypes are of Mexicans. Being, I have not been over in Japan for an extended period of time. So I don't know if the whole, like, giant dumb brute thing is a stereotype they have. All I know is that he fights with a cactus.
Yeah, and his name is the Cactus.
Yeah. So it's like, and I'm complaining about him. Gorilla Jeet Singh I only don't say is worse just because he shows up mercifully less.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's still the exact same problem because he basically comes in with a scimitar.
Yeah, and a turban, and he's just screaming incoherently, and it's like, look at that crazy South Asian.
Yeah, basically. So, anytime, I think I described this at on the show, it's basically having dinner with your racist grandfather and just praying that they're not gonna say anything stupid.
Yeah, it's a really fun time. So my for the second pick of the fourth round, I am going to pick everyone's favorite teen idols, Nama Ham and Yaki Udon.
I was actually trying to find their names earlier, but I was like, no, never mind.
Yeah, I thought you might think of it because this was ages ago. This is like six. So it was what was it? Like episode 6, I think.
Yep. It was an early one.
And this was again. It was shortly. This was 2 episodes after Red Death Mask, and this was really where we started to think, "Oh no, what is this show? What are we watching?" Because essentially, what happens is this episode is dedicated to the appearance of these 2 idols named Nama Ham and Yaki Udon, who have the strangest voices I've ever heard in an anime. Clearly because they're like gag idols and they recorded the episode themselves, and the whole thing centers around them hating wrestling but then learning to love it by watching Tiger Mask.
Yep. For defending them from Gorilla Jeet Singh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the whole thing, is that Gorilla Jeet Singh, because he's an insane South Asian, wants to kill them with a scimitar for no reason.
Right.
And then they respond with their pure love of wrestling by singing a goofy song to the whole crowd, and everyone cheers along. It's really, it was at this point that we realized just how much of an advertisement this show was, that it like had no desire to tell a story consistently. It was just sort of doing whatever for whoever. And it was just really uncomfortable and boring and upsetting all at the same time.
So it's interesting. The reason I decided in the end to not do any more research to try and figure out what their names were, I had kind of decided that the only reason I couldn't list them is because I thought the investigation of who they actually were was actually really funny to me. And I thought that journey and that discovery was too fun for me. For a show that's so painful to watch, that having something that was genuinely fun for me to discover, maybe for all the wrong reasons, but even so.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's hard to judge, because the episode we recorded for that when we talked about it was really fun. Trying to figure out what the heck we had just watched, but treat it like, if you just are looking at it as the characters themselves, or the episodes themselves, they're awful.
Yep, you are absolutely right. Okay, so my second pick for worst character is actually the title character, Tiger Mask.
Oh no. Okay.
Tiger Mask / Naoto. I think the biggest problem I have with Tiger Mask is that they try to turn him into a more complicated character than he needs to be. Tiger Mask is supposed to be this representation of, like, the people's hopes.
Yeah.
Goofy stuff like that. I mean, this is a character who, like, Naoto won't even reveal who he is to his would-be girlfriend just because, because it's not really me. It's just Tiger Mask is just supposed to represent the will of the people.
Yeah. And
it's like, okay, first of all, when was that established? Okay, I know probably in the past, like, 70s anime, fine, whatever, but come on, Naoto. Like, that's not the type of story you're really telling here. Mm-hmm. But yet they try and pass Tiger Mask off as being this sort of, like, almost superhero character. But then they do this whole thing where he's trying to, like, he kind of goes to this thing where all he cares about is fighting Tiger the Great III and getting that match with him, So he goes and fights with GWM with the Miracles. And it's just the most pointless storyline, because you already have that character who fell to the dark side in Takuma. And it's such an unnecessary and needless story that it's like, when he finally... I don't think it would have bothered me so much if it was maybe like a temptation, or maybe something he did once and then kind of pulls away. It's like, wait, what am I doing? But no, he beats up some of the New Japan Pro Wrestling wrestlers over the head with a chair.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, Naoto, there is no coming back for you from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just weird that, like, the show makes it so easy for him to get back on everyone's good side. And, I mean, again, you have to wonder what message are they trying to send to their audience?
Yeah, kind of. It's like, okay, so he turned his back on his friends, but, they kind of just accept him back almost immediately.
Yeah, there's no real consequences.
Yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, they're kind of, like, mad at him for a little bit, but then when, like, he comes in and saves one of them, all of a sudden, all is forgiven.
Yeah.
I don't know. He's just... And I think it doesn't help as well that Naoto himself is such a boring, stale guy.
Yeah, he's just so vapid. There's no depth. Like, you get a little bit of background in one episode, but it's basically like, oh yeah, like, there was a natural disaster in my hometown, and I was living in a camp, but then I saw a wrestling match, and I was inspired to be a wrestler, so I became a wrestler.
Like, that's the sort of backstory you give to, like, a one-off episode character.
And
right?
But that's all you ever got. You never met anyone in his family. You never saw anything beyond that. All you saw was, like, I like wrestling and also revenge.
And I don't think it would be that big of a deal. But again, they're trying to tell this story with him. Like they're trying to do this, like, deep character study of Tiger Mask.
Yeah, but there's no character to study.
Right, like, it's like, it would be fine if they had gone with a very simple character. Like, if they were basically making him out to be, like, the superhero character, but they don't do that.
Yeah.
And they just, to me, he just sort of represents this indecision that the series has.
Yeah. Alright, so for the final pick on my team and the final pick of the draft, I'm going to go with Lady.
Okay.
Lady is Miss X's assistant. This is a bit of a desperation pick for me because literally everything on my list was taken since you took Gorilla Jeet Singh and Saboten and Tiger Mask. That was my whole list. But so just trying to come up with something else, I think Lady was a little disappointing. Mostly for the reasons we've described with some other characters, is that there was a lot of potential in that she was this very strange, analytical character that sort of seemed detached from Miss X. She worked with her, but it wasn't clear to whom her loyalties were. In episode 31, we saw her having a conversation, having lunch with Fukuwara Mask, and Fukuwara Mask seemed embarrassed or trying to explain it away, and so there was a lot of potential there for her to be like a double agent or something going on, but that just happened with no justification, no explanation, and no connection to anything. They didn't even have a meaningful look after that.
Yeah, pretty much. Like, there was a lot that could have been done with her. It's like, oh, is she Fukuwara Mask's daughter, and is he trying to keep her out, like, is he trying to keep her away from GWM?
Yeah.
But, she kind of sort of just fell into it just like he did. And, you're right. There was a lot more that they could have done with her.
Yeah, so for 37 episodes or however long she was in there, she was just kind of boring. She didn't earn any of her character traits. There was no explanation, no justification. It wasn't fun. In episode 38, you saw how that character could be fun. She could be kind of detached, but kind of goofy in a way. And so it was like, sort of the only thing with episode 38 was it showed, oh, this is what they should have been doing with her the whole time. If they had just done this and made this her characterization, it would have worked. But because they didn't, it made her a waste up until then.
Yep. No, I totally agree with you there. I mean, honestly, the reason I didn't write her down was because I forgot she was a character. So.
Yeah, that happens too. Alright, so I think those are some good teams. Are there any bonuses you want to we don't need to do a discussion, but any characters you want to just throw out that you didn't get to mention?
I was gonna mention Mr. Bigfoot.
Me too. He was on my list.
Just because, I don't know, it was a fine fight, and he was... I think I had mentioned this. He was like one of the few characters who I felt like would have fit in just fine with the original Tiger Mask, or what they should have tried to go for with it.
Yeah.
And then on my worst list, I had Takuma as well. I had the 2 title characters and then the 2 racist characters.
That's a good list. So before we close out, I just want to take a minute. So for anyone who's listening and for some reason has listened to this point in the episode, 1, thank you. And 2, if you haven't actually watched Tiger Mask, we trashed a lot of it, but there really are some fun episodes. So we wanted to highlight a few of them real quick before we wrap up. So the first one, we could just alternate. But the first one is just episode 1 called The Two Tigers. I think it's important to watch just because if you watch this one episode, you'll understand the entire conceit of the show, you'll understand the premise, and any other details won't be that important. You can just fit it in and connect it to the information you get from the first episode. Additionally, the initial fight in the first third of this episode is really fun. It's really stylistic, and it has a good vibe, and so it's worth seeing for backstory and for seeing the first fight with Yellow Devil in that show.
Yep. I would also mention as well that it has perhaps the goofiest thing that has happened in the show, which is Naoto dangling from a tree, a bear runs after him, and he, grabs the bear and flips around on the tree and suplexes the bear.
Yeah.
Which, to me, really set a high standard for the show that it could not live up to.
That's true.
The next episode, of course, we've mentioned it repeatedly. It is the Red Death Mask episode.
Which is...
Episode 4, sorry.
Yep.
Red Death Mask is... we've mentioned him, we mentioned him in our best characters. It's just a really fun fight. It's kind of a really intense fight, too. You don't really see anything like that, brutal in the series, like with Red Death Mask.
Yeah.
He
makes people bleed out of their face.
Right. There's this great moment when he's fighting Ryu, and, you just see the agony on his face.
He killed Ryu. He
totally killed him. But even though he didn't, and nobody seems to want to address that he's perfectly fine the next episode. But, whatever.
We should have put Ryu on the best characters. The amount of times that he gets mutilated and no one comments on it or cares. That was one of my favorite tropes from this show. Nobody gives a crap about Ryu.
And he doesn't even turn out to be an important character in the end.
So that is a fun one. It's a good one. It's well animated. It's a real highlight.
Right.
The next one, I'm going to kind of cheat and combine 2 episodes because it's a combined plot, and they're both worth watching, but it's episodes 19 and 20, which is the Hell in the Hole arc. So this is when Takuma and Kevin are on the outs with GWM because they lost to Tiger Mask, and so they have to redeem themselves by doing this free-for-all battle on a volcano in the wilderness for a gambling audience, and so the structure ends up being pretty fun. You see a bunch of funny combinations, you see some good fights, you see some more Red Death Mask, and it ends up just being a good series of fights, a fun tone, and yeah, it works, and it makes Takuma and Kevin more interesting characters than they were at any point before that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair. And of course it does have Red Death Mask running around with a table. And also the underappreciated Terminator robot that they have to fight at the very end. We kind of goes completely unaddressed, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, wait, is this show going to turn into, a man versus robot thing? Nope, just the one.
No, just that one time. Actually, I have to confess something. During the final episode, when Mother Devil walks out, I actually thought she was one of those robots.
Yeah, that would have been a pretty deep cut for this show, but yeah.
Especially because she kind of looks like the Terminator, like a female version of the Terminator.
Yeah, you're right, she does. Yeah.
So yeah, but the next episode we would probably recommend is Farewell Tiger, which is episode 37. Again, it's one of those episodes where it has a great fight at the end. The fight against, for all of its faults, the fight against Tiger the Great the Third is actually really fun. They've really got. the fact that they got a budget for this episode really shows.
Mm-hmm.
They get a lot of really cool shots. It's pretty well animated. It feels really fluid. You get some pretty, like, Tiger Mask's final blow against Tiger the Great III really does, like, have some real impact to it. It's a great fight. And then there's also a great fun scene at the very end where they're at the airport and apparently everybody is running around screaming for the tiger that they are interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was good. It, like, even though there wasn't enough characterization to get them there, it was good to finally see the revenge match that now,
Right.
the show had been promising us the whole time, and, they got it. And that was pretty much it. There wasn't much complexity to it, but they got it.
Yeah, and that's really all the show needed.
Yeah. And then the last episode is of course, the unexpected gift of episode 38, Spring Tiger, where we were dreading having to watch this episode because it just felt like pointlessly extending the show to talk about horror enough for no reason. But it ended up being an absolute highlight because they got a budget, they got much better direction, and they got a quality script, which turns out is really all you need to make an enjoyable and watchable show. And so that, honestly, if you're going to watch one episode, watch episode 38. Don't worry about the context. You'll figure it out. It's worth it just as a 20-minute piece of animation all on its own.
Yep. It benefits from knowing the series beforehand.
Yeah.
Because there are some in-jokes in there that you're not going to get if you don't watch the series.
Yeah,
but I mean,
also, it's a long series. Spare
and
yourself.
it's not worth watching for that.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, Matt, is there anyone that you would recommend Tiger Mask W2 as a show?
I mean, if you're a wrestling fan, I guess that's the only person I can recommend it to, because those are the only people I have seen who seem to genuinely enjoy the show.
Yeah.
Frankly, which baffles me, to be honest, because I didn't really, as a non-wrestling fan, I didn't really get much out of this.
Yeah.
Outside of just some decently animated episodes, and of course, episode 38.
Yeah.
I guess otherwise, it's not a... Well, no. I don't think it's the worst thing we've watched, but I don't think it's the best. I mean,
it's obviously not the best. Yeah.
I wouldn't know. I don't even know if I would classify it as good. It's certainly not the worst thing we've watched, though.
No.
But
yeah, high praise from Matt on Tiger Mask. So don't watch Tiger Mask unless you already like wrestling or New Japan Pro Wrestling. But do watch episodes 1, 4, 19, 20, 37, and most importantly, 38.
Pretty much.
All right, I think we're good for time on this one. We went a little long, but it was fun. I enjoyed doing the draft with you, Matt.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I enjoyed watching this very, very silly show with you these last 9 months.
It does feel like an end of an era almost, because this was the show that pretty much... We've had this for the entirety of KoshienCast, and it's finally over, so...
I know.
It kind of feels like a brave new world almost.
Yeah, it is. And we'll brave it together next week on KoshienCast. How do you like that transition? What if that should have been the end of the show, but I'm just going to keep talking. No. All right. I'll talk to you later, Matt. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Our logo design is by James Ratcliffe. The theme music is Fly High by Burnout Syndromes, covered and performed by Luke Bartka. You can follow KoshienCast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and our email is koshiancast@gmail.com. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll be back next week with the best and worst from the world of sports anime, and until then, keep training.